The world had always known Julian West as the man who built an empire from nothing, a legacy of cold boardrooms and red-eye flights. He was the name behind Westcorp, the luxury hotel chain that stretched from coastlines to skylines, and he wore his success like armor. But no headline ever captured the man behind the marble desks and polished smiles. No press release ever mentioned that Julian had once changed diapers in an airport lounge, or paced through midnight fevers with a baby monitor balanced on a stack of quarterly reports. Now at 38, he was leaning against the frame of a cracked motel bathroom door in Nevada, watching his 6-year-old daughter brush her teeth with the kind of concentration that didn't belong to someone her age. Her name was Ava. His whole life was Ava. "Don't forget the back ones," he said softly. She grinned, toothpaste on her chin. "I already did." Julian nodded, pretending he wasn't panicking. Every instinct in his body screamed this was a mistake. The cheap walls around them reeked of old smoke and failed dreams, the kind of place he'd never have looked at twice before this week. But the custody order had come in 3 days ago, and just like that, he was no longer safe. Not in his penthouse, not in his office, not even with his daughter. The judge had sided with Christine, his ex-wife, after months of cold mediations and whispered slander. Christine was the mother of his child, but also someone who had made it clear that Ava was better off with full-time nannies and international schools, not messy pancakes and bedtime stories read in a tired dad's voice. Julian hadn't been perfect, but he had been present. So he ran, not out of impulse, but something deeper. Fear, love, a desperate, strangled instinct to protect the only thing that still made sense in his life. He told himself it was temporary, just until he could appeal, just until someone listened. He'd hired the best attorney on the West Coast, but in the meantime there were no suitcases, just backpacks, no itinerary, just the battered roadmap he hadn't used in years. He'd taken his Tesla as far as it would go, then traded it in cash for a 10-year-old Ford that coughed every time it shifted gears. He had burner phones, prepaid cards, and a daughter who kept asking when they were going home. He didn't have an answer. That night Ava fell asleep with her head on his chest, her tiny fingers curled into his t-shirt. He stared at the ceiling, counting the water stains, trying to convince himself this wasn't a kidnapping. She was his daughter, his blood, but the headlines wouldn't see it that way. Neither would the court. Somewhere in Lowe's Angels, Christine was already preparing the next round of legal fire, framing him as unstable, unfit, and selfish. She was good at framing things. In the morning he drove, nowhere specific. Small towns blurred past his window like a faded postcard. At a diner off a winding mountain road in Utah, he stopped. Ava needed food, something warm, something normal. The bell above the door jingled when they walked in, hand in hand. It was a quiet place with mismatched booths and sun-bleached photos of hikers on the walls. The kind of place that hadn't changed in 30 years and didn't care. She noticed him almost immediately. He noticed her too. The waitress, tall, lean, late 20s, maybe early 30s, had dark hair braided back tight and tired eyes that didn't miss much. There was something unassuming about her, like she'd lived more than her age allowed but didn't wear it as armor. She looked at Ava first, then at him, not in judgment, not like she recognized him from a magazine cover, just curiosity and something quieter. "Pick a seat," she said, wiping her hands on a faded apron. "Coffee." "Please," Julian said, his voice rusty. Ava slid into the booth and peered out the window, humming under her breath. Julian watched her, then turned back to the waitress. "You have pancakes. Fluffy or thin? Whichever kids like." The waitress smiled, just a flicker. "Fluffy, then." He caught the name on her tag as she turned. "Me." The food came fast, simple, and hot. Julian sipped the coffee. It was terrible, but it grounded him. Ava was laughing, something about how the syrup made her pancake look like a happy face. He couldn't stop watching her. Every minute they spent outside LA, the more himself she seemed to become, less filtered, less scheduled. Me came back with the check and lingered, her eyes briefly flicking over to the backpack on the seat next to Ava. A small pink bunny ear was sticking out. "You passing through?" she asked. "Something like that," he said. She nodded, then after a second, "You look like you're running from something." He froze just long enough to make it obvious. She didn't press, just gathered the check and slipped behind the counter. Julian stood abruptly. "Come on, honey," he said to Ava, "let's go." He walked up to the register. Me was already waiting, quiet. "Keep the change," he said, placing a 20 on the counter. She looked at him again, more directly now. "You're not the first person to land here running." "I'm not." "I didn't say you were, I just said you looked like it." He studied her face. There was no threat in her tone, no accusation, just fact. He wondered what her story was. Before he could ask, Ava tugged his sleeve. "Daddy, can we stay somewhere not in the car tonight?" He crouched beside her, brushing hair from her cheek. "I'll find us something, I promise." Me's voice came again, softer. "There's an old cabin about 5 minutes from here. My uncle rents it out sometimes to hikers. No one's using it right now. It's not fancy, but it's warm. I can call him if you want." Julian hesitated. "You don't even know me." "I didn't say I was giving you my house keys," Me said. "Just a number, and a place that doesn't smell like gasoline and fear." His jaw tensed. She shrugged, "Take it or leave it." He took it. They arrived at the cabin by dusk. The sky turned copper behind the trees, and the air was cooler than it had any right to be in early fall. Me's uncle had left the key in the mailbox, just like she said. It wasn't much, one room, a stove, a bed, and a stack of scratchy blankets, but Ava curled up like she'd found heaven. Julian stood outside the cabin after she'd gone to sleep, breathing in pine and distance. He didn't know why Me had helped them, or why he'd trusted her, but something had shifted, just a fraction. And tomorrow, for the first time in days, he didn't plan to drive. The morning broke slow and amber. Shafts of light filtered through the slatted cabin windows, casting long beams across the wooden floor. Julian stirred to the sound of birdsong instead of honking horns, disoriented at first by the unfamiliar rhythm of silence. Then he remembered the day before, Me, the diner, the cabin, the way Ava had fallen asleep without asking what came next. She was still asleep, curled under a plaid blanket with her bunny tucked close. He watched her for a moment, his chest tight with something he couldn't name. Not guilt, not exactly, something heavier. A dawning realization that no matter what he told himself, he was in uncharted waters, and Ava, she was floating with him, unaware of the rocks beneath. He stepped outside, his phone in his pocket, unused. He hadn't turned it on since they left the city. Not since the attorney's last text, warning him that things were escalating. The court had issued an emergency writ for Ava's return. He hadn't read the whole document. He didn't need to. The woods were quiet, only the wind and the groan of old trees as they shifted in their roots. The air was clean in a way that seemed almost suspicious to him. Untouched, unbothered. He stood on the cabin porch and exhaled like he hadn't in weeks. A crunch of gravel pulled his attention. He turned sharply. "May?" She was walking up the path, balancing 2 paper bags and a thermos in her arms. Still in jeans and boots, hair pulled back again, like she did this kind of thing every morning. "I figured you probably didn't stock up on much," she said by way of greeting. "The store in town's nothing fancy, but they have good eggs and even better coffee if you doctor it with enough cream." Julian blinked. "You drove all the way out here to bring me breakfast." "You and the kid," she said simply. "And it's not far. Half the locals hike this trail for fun on weekends." He stepped forward, took the bags before she could fumble them. "Thank you." Me studied him a moment. "You still look like you haven't slept in a year." "Feels accurate." "You planning on staying long?" He hesitated. "A few days." "You'll need groceries. There's no Uber Eats in Pine Hollow." That was the first time he'd heard the name of the town, Pine Hollow. It sounded like something from a storybook, not the kind of place a man like him would end up running to with a backpack and a 6-year-old. Ava's voice echoed from inside the cabin, light and questioning. "Daddy." He turned. "Out here, sweetheart." She appeared in the doorway a second later, rubbing sleep from her eyes, then saw me and lit up. "Hi, you brought breakfast." Me smiled. "Sure did. Hope you like apples and bagels." "I love apples." Julian watched the exchange in quiet awe. Ava wasn't normally this open with strangers, but something about Me brought her out, softened her. Maybe because Me didn't talk to her like a baby, she talked to her like a person. They ate on the porch, knees tucked to their chests, plates balanced on their laps. Me told them about the town. One gas station, one school, a church that doubled as a community center. The diner was the only restaurant unless you counted the taco truck that came through on Wednesdays. It was the kind of place people stayed in once they stopped trying to leave. Julian was careful not to say too much. He didn't lie, but he kept the truth wrapped tight. Still, me noticed things. She noticed how he flinched when Ava mentioned her mother. She noticed how his shoulders never really dropped, even when he laughed. She noticed how he checked the road every time a car passed, like he expected someone to come looking. "You were in the news, weren't you?" she said finally, after Ava wandered back inside. He froze. It wasn't a question. "I didn't say anything before because I wasn't sure," me continued, voice low. "But I remember seeing your face. Some article a few months back. Hotel Empire, something about a bitter divorce." Julian didn't respond. "I don't care," she said. He looked at her then, really looked. "You should." Me shook her head. "I've seen worse. This town has more stories than it has people. You'd be surprised what folks carry around when no one's watching." "What do you think I'm carrying?" "Fear, guilt, maybe both, but mostly love if I had to guess." He exhaled, shaky. "I didn't steal her." "I didn't say you did." "But that's what they're calling it, in court, in the news. Christine's lawyers, they're framing it like I snapped." Me was quiet. "I didn't know where else to go," he admitted. "Now you do," she said. They stayed 2 more nights, then 3. Julian found himself doing things he hadn't done in years, making pancakes, chopping firewood, sitting still. Ava chased squirrels around the clearing and found sticks she insisted were magic. She laughed louder, slept deeper, drew pictures of the cabin like it was a castle. Julian kept waiting for the moment he'd wake up and realize he couldn't stay, that it wasn't fair to me, that the law would catch up. But that moment never came. Instead, me kept showing up with groceries or soup or stories about the town. She never asked more than he could give, never pushed, but she was present in a way he hadn't expected, quietly steady. And then one afternoon, while Ava napped, Julian found himself chopping wood again just for something to do, when me walked up the path holding something in her hands. A yellow envelope. "What's that?" he asked. It came to the diner, addressed to Julian West, general delivery. No return address. Figured you want it. He wiped his hands and took it, already feeling the heat in his chest. He tore it open with a practiced motion, expecting a court summons or a threat. But it wasn't from Christine, not a lawyer, just a note. "You can't hide forever, we're coming." No signature. His blood ran cold. Me saw the change in his face. "What is it?" He crumpled the note, shaking his head. "Nothing." "Julian." I said it's nothing. But his hands didn't stop shaking, not even when me reached out and steadied them without asking. Not even when her touch was gentle and grounding. Not even when she said quietly, "You don't have to do this alone." The air shifted after the letter. Julian felt it first, like the cabin had lost its warmth, like the woods had turned from refuge to warning. He tried to keep things normal for Ava, painting smiles into his voice and reading extra chapters at bedtime, but something about the way he glanced out the window too often gave him away. Me saw it too. She didn't press him again about the letter, but she started lingering longer in the mornings, subtly watching the road. Even when she didn't say much, her presence filled the cabin like a quiet shield. 3 days passed, then 4. Julian knew it was time to move again, but something inside him resisted. Not just exhaustion, something else. A tether he hadn't expected to grow, and me was part of it. She wasn't just a waitress at a roadside diner anymore. She had slipped beneath his defenses without effort or permission. Not with grand gestures, but in the way she handed Ava an extra napkin without being asked, or the way she remembered Julian's coffee just the way he ruined it. Too strong, too bitter, too black. On the 5th night, thunder rolled over the mountains, low and steady, the kind that settled in your bones. Julian stayed up late at the cabin table with a pencil and one of Ava's sketch pads, scribbling plans, routes, possibilities. There weren't many. Every road led back to the same place, court, custody, the slow erosion of his voice in his own daughter's life. The knock on the door came just past 10. He went still, heart jackknifing. Another knock, slower this time. He crossed the room quietly, hand at the small of his back where he'd started carrying a pocket knife, just in case.
Then, it's me. Me?
He opened the door and found her standing in the rain, hoodie up, holding a plastic bag against her chest like a shield. Her eyes were rimmed red. "Sorry," she said quickly. "I didn't mean to scare you. I didn't want to be alone tonight." Julian stepped aside without a word and she entered, dripping and silent. He took the bag from her and set it on the counter.
It's soup, she said softly. I couldn't sleep.
He made her tea. Ava was already asleep in the corner bed, curled tight. Me sat at the table, watching the steam rise from her cup. Her hair was damp, and Julian had never seen her look so unguarded.
Something happened, he asked.
She was quiet for a long time. "My uncle passed away last year," she said finally. "He left me the cabin, that's why I have the key. He used to say this place keeps secrets better than most." Julian nodded slowly. "He was the one who found me after I got away from my ex," she added, voice low. "It took me months to admit I'd been trapped. People don't always believe you when there's no bruises." He looked at her then, really looked, and something inside him shifted.
"I believe you," he said.
She smiled faintly, eyes wet. "That's why I brought soup." Julian chuckled, soft and brief, a sound pulled from somewhere buried. They didn't speak much after that. The thunder outside dulled to a whisper and me stayed until nearly 2, sitting with him in the quiet, not asking, not demanding, just being. And for the first time in weeks, Julian let his guard drop long enough to feel how much he missed this kind of presence. Not passion, not heat, just the safety of someone who saw you and stayed anyway. The next morning came with pale sunlight and frost along the porch railing. Ava played outside in the clearing, chasing a breeze with a homemade kite, while me helped Julian clear brush from the cabin path. It felt like something domestic, something real, but the feeling didn't last. Just after noon, a black SUV appeared at the edge of the trees. Julian spotted it first through the narrow window above the stove. It didn't belong to anyone in town, too clean, too new, too tinted. He stepped outside, body coiled. Me followed him out, reading his expression before she even saw the vehicle. "Someone you know?" she asked. "No," he said tightly, "but I know the type." The SUV didn't move. It just idled, humming low, too far to make out a license plate but close enough to feel like a message. Ava ran up to them, breathless and beaming. My kite touched a branch. Julian scooped her up without a word and carried her inside. Me locked the door behind them. "Could be a coincidence," she offered, but her tone lacked conviction. Julian paced the small room, pulse racing. "They found us." "You sure it's not your lawyer?" "No one has this address, not even him. This was off-grid." Me pulled the curtain back an inch. The SUV was gone. Just like that. But the damage had been done. "I can't keep putting her at risk," Julian said, his voice barely audible. "I thought we could lay low just for a while, but that was fantasy. I'm dragging her through something she didn't ask for." Me stepped toward him. "You're trying to protect her. That's not the same as dragging. She needs stability, a school, friends, a real life, not some motel to cabin rotation while her dad tries to outpace the courts." Me didn't argue, she just nodded, slow and sad. That night Julian packed their bags. He didn't tell Ava the truth, just that it was time for another adventure. She accepted it the way kids do, as long as there was juice and her bunny. Me came by with sandwiches and a quiet heart. "You're leaving in the morning." "Before sunrise." She didn't ask where. They stood in the doorway of the cabin, watching the last streaks of dusk disappear into tree line. Julian cleared his throat. "I don't know how to thank you." "You don't have to. You helped us." "I helped you," she said, her voice catching. "Because I wanted to, because I see how you look at her, because you're not what the papers say." Julian swallowed hard. "If things were different." "They're not." He nodded. But before she turned to leave, Me did something he didn't expect. She stepped forward and pressed a small, folded piece of paper into his hand. "Her phone number." For when you stop running, she said. And then she walked back down the path, her shoulders straight, her head high, and Julian watched her go with a hollowness that would settle in deep. They drove through the early light, headlights cutting through lingering fog, Ava asleep again in the back seat with her bunny against her cheek. Julian kept one hand on the wheel, the other resting on the gearshift, though he hadn't changed gears in nearly an hour. He didn't use GPS, just instinct and the folding map Mee had tucked into the glove compartment before they left. He'd meant to go south, but sometime after crossing the state line, he turned east instead. By late afternoon, they reached Colorado. He found a roadside cabin lodge outside a town called Ridgewell, tucked along a river bend, surrounded by pine and sandstone. It wasn't as remote as Mee's place, but quiet enough. The kind of spot families booked for Christmas or late summer fishing trips. There was a swing set out front and rows of tiny cabins painted dark green. He paid in cash for a week, no questions asked. They settled in, if such a word applied to people living out of backpacks. Ava adjusted faster than he expected. She drew trees and mountains in her notebook and named the squirrels who scurried across the porch railings. She missed me, asked about her once or twice, but didn't linger on the topic. Kids let go easier than adults, or maybe they just trust that things come back around. Julian didn't sleep much. His mind kept playing loops. The SUV in the trees, the letter with no signature, the look in Mee's eyes when she handed him her number. For a man who had once been the master of decisions, he was suddenly unsure of every move he made. He tried not to call her. But on the third night in Ridgewell, with Ava tucked into bed and snow starting to dust the cabin roof, he stepped outside and dialed. The phone rang twice before she picked up. "You're okay," she said, not a question, a statement that carried something between relief and restraint. "I wasn't going to call," he admitted. "I figured you're a professional runner now." There was a pause, a small smile in her voice. "Where are you?" "Colorado." "That's not an answer." He looked out at the pine trees silhouetted against the cold night sky. "I'm not sure I have one anymore." Another silence. "I miss your daughter," she said finally, "and I hope you're not sleeping in the car." Julian let out a breath, the kind you only release when someone is kind to you for no reason. "Thank you," he said. "For what?" "For showing me what steady looks like." She didn't answer, just the soft sound of her breathing through the line. In Ridgewell, the days passed in rhythm. Julian took Ava into town for groceries, careful to stay off security cameras. He read to her at night, taught her how to skip stones in the river. They made pancakes from a box mix and played board games left behind by past guests. It was a life without precision, without polish, but Ava smiled more. Julian smiled too, sometimes. But the feeling of being hunted never fully left. And then, a week in, it happened. They were coming back from the market, Ava holding a paper bag of apples when he saw the sedan, parked across the street. No markings, two men inside, not speaking, not eating, not pretending. He didn't stop walking, just adjusted his pace and turned toward a side trail, murmuring something to Ava about feeding the ducks. He didn't look back until they reached the tree line. When he did, the car was still there. That night he didn't sleep. He packed again. But this time he didn't run blind, he called someone. Mee answered on the second ring. "I need a favor," he said, the words tasting like surrender. "You're still in Colorado." "Yes." She was quiet, then said, "I know someone. She's not a lawyer, but she works with women who have gone through custody battles. Not the high-rise kind, but the ones that get messy, cruel. She might be able to help if you come back." Julian closed his eyes. "I can't bring Ava back there." "Then don't, but come somewhere near, I'll meet you." He hesitated. Mee's voice dropped a notch. "You don't have to keep disappearing, Julian. There are other ways to fight than running." He looked across the small cabin room at his daughter, coloring in the notebook Mee had once given her. "Okay," he said, "tell me where." Mee met them in a town called Elkridge, 2 hours from Pine Hollow, where the roads ran straight but the air stayed sharp. She brought hot chocolate in thermoses and a box of crayons for Ava. Julian didn't know what to say when he saw her. There was no hug, no dramatic reunion, just a long look, quiet understanding, and the kind of silence that only forms between two people who have both known what it is to be hurt and still show up anyway. The woman Me introduced him to was named Lillian, gray hair, steel voice. She had once fought a custody battle while living out of her car. Now she helped others do the same, fathers too sometimes. She had documents ready within the hour, forms to petition for an emergency custody hearing based on new information, not in California, in Colorado. It's risky, she warned. The judge could still side with the mother, but if we can show emotional harm, displacement, fear of retaliation, there's a chance. Julian nodded. I'll take it. They filed within 3 days. Christine's legal team responded fast, too fast, but not before Julian submitted Ava's pediatric records, character witnesses, and a personal statement that Lillian helped him write. He didn't write like a CEO, not for this. He wrote like a father, flawed, honest, desperate not to be erased from his daughter's life. The hearing was set for the following week. They rented a small unit near the courthouse. Me stayed in town, said she had family nearby. Julian didn't ask. He was learning to let her offer what she chose, no more. The night before the hearing, it snowed. Ava slept in Me's borrowed guest room, and Julian sat by the window, staring at the street lamp glow over ice. Me brought him tea again, no words. He finally turned to her. What do you think the judge will say? I don't know. I keep trying to figure out what I'd do if I lose her. Me sat beside him, tucking her knees up under her sweater. You'll still be her dad. That doesn't get taken by papers or rulings. Julian looked at her then, really looked. I don't know who I am without her, he said. You're the man who ran through 3 states for her. That counts for something. He didn't know what to say, so he reached for her hand. She didn't pull away. The courthouse was quiet the way churches are quiet, too still, too clean, as if grief and truth both arrived wearing suits. Julian stood outside the hearing room with Ava beside him, her small hand tucked into his. She wore the yellow dress Me had bought at the second-hand shop, and her curls had been carefully brushed that morning, though a few already rebelled around her forehead. Me stood a few steps back, watching. Julian turned to her. You don't have to come in. I know, she said, but I'm staying. He gave her a grateful nod, then followed the clerk into the hearing room. It was smaller than he expected. No jury box, just a long table, a judge behind a raised bench, and 2 rows of chairs. Christine was already there, flanked by her lawyer, impeccably dressed in a navy blazer, her eyes sharp beneath flawless makeup. She didn't look at Julian, just Ava. Julian could feel her gaze like ice. The judge, an older man with a silver beard and a voice like gravel, asked both sides to begin. Christine's attorney spoke first. He painted a portrait of recklessness and instability, of a father who'd abducted his child in a panic and endangered her by fleeing the state. He cited precedent, articles, and court orders. Christine dabbed her eyes with a tissue at all the right moments. When it was Julian's turn, he stood slowly. He had no lawyer by his side, just the folder Lillian had helped him organize, and the fire in his chest that hadn't gone out since the day he'd first held Ava in a hospital blanket. He didn't raise his voice, he didn't try to impress, he just spoke. She's my daughter, he said, and I know every parent says that with conviction, but I mean it in the way that only comes from being the one who's always shown up. I changed her diapers between meetings. I read her stories in hotel rooms after 12-hour days. I was there for her first fall, her first fever, her first day of preschool. He looked at Christine, who glanced away. When the court gave her full custody, I didn't run because I was unstable. I ran because I knew what came next. I've seen what her life looks like with nannies and tutors and silence. I've seen what happens when love is replaced by convenience. And I wasn't willing to watch my daughter become a stranger. He paused. I don't want to keep running. I want to be her father. I am her father. And all I'm asking for is the chance to keep showing up for her. He didn't add more. The judge asked a few questions. Ava was not called to speak. Julian was glad. Some stories didn't belong in courtrooms. The decision came the next day. They waited at the small motel Me had moved into for the week. Julian paced the parking lot while Ava built a snowman that was mostly just a slush pile with twigs. Me stayed near the window, watching both of them like she was trying to memorize the moment. When the phone rang, Julian didn't answer right away. He let it buzz twice, 3 times, then picked it up. It was Lillian. He listened in silence, then nodded. When he hung up, Me stepped out onto the porch. He looked at her, eyes red, shoulders lowered. "They're giving me joint custody," he said. "Supervised for now, but it's a start." Me smiled gently. "That's more than most people get." She tried to block it. Christine said I was manipulating the court with theatrics, said I'd made Ava dependent on chaos. "But you didn't," Me said. "You made her feel safe." Julian looked out across the parking lot, at his daughter's small shape bundled in yellow, arms raised like she was calling the sky. "I'm tired, Me. I know, but I don't regret any of it." "Good," she said, "because neither does she." Weeks passed. He rented a place just outside Denver, a small 2-bedroom home with squeaky floorboards and a broken mailbox, but Ava liked it. She picked her own room and decorated it with glow-in-the-dark stars. Christine didn't approve, but the court order stood. Julian met the social worker once a week. He followed every rule, every step. Me visited sometimes, never for long, just enough to remind him she was still within reach, but never so often that he forgot how much space they both still needed to grow. One evening in late spring, as he walked Ava to the car after her visit with Christine, she looked up at him and said, "I don't like the house Mom's in. It's big, but it's loud." Julian knelt beside her. "You can tell her that if you want." "I did," Ava said, frowning. "She said I'll get used to it." Julian smoothed her hair. "It's okay to miss quiet." Ava leaned into his chest, a small sigh escaping her lips. "I like your house better, even though it smells like burnt toast." He laughed, held her close. Later, after she fell asleep watching a movie, Julian stepped outside. The sky was full of stars that felt oddly close. He pulled out his phone. Me answered on the first ring. "I'm still learning," he said. "So am I." He hesitated. "I want to see where this goes, not just with Ava, with you." There was a pause on the line, then, "You've come a long way west." "Not far enough." "Then let's keep going," she said. And for the first time in a long while, Julian felt like the road ahead wasn't something to run from. It was something to build on, slowly, honestly, brick by brick. Maybe love didn't always arrive in the right order. Maybe it came after the storms, after the courts, after you stripped everything back to what mattered. But it came, and when it did, it stayed.